Good morning, good morning, good morning. Happy Thursday. Welcome to the Startup Traction Hotline, my weekly office hours right here on YouTube. My name is JDM, aka Josh David Miller, and I've helped more than 100 companies launch or scale their products. And I bring that right here to answer whatever questions you have from idea all the way to product market fit. Today, got some interesting things to talk about. We're going to talk about pitching a little bit. We're also going to talk about customer personas, which is a topic that's very interesting to me. If you have a question that you want to throw my way, you can drop it down into the comments or into the live chat if you're joining me live, or you could just smash up this link right over here. And this link here will take you to a place where you can submit a question in writing, or you can actually record a video message. And if you record a video message, I will play it on the air during the show. It's been a while since you guys have done that. Seem to be preferring the text-based questions lately. I don't know what's up with that, but don't be shy. Give me a little video to play. It'll be nice and fun. So let's dive in straight away to our first question. So this is going to be about customer personas, the importance of customer personas. And I titled it a little bit generically because I actually spent all last weekend facilitating an event called the Startup Challenge, which was here in Sacramento. We got together a group of 16, I think was the total number, 16 companies together for a competition to find as much traction as they could in just 48 hours. It's a pretty awesome event. It's pretty great. Had some really impressive traction, some really impressive founders and companies, and also had some just really stellar wins throughout the weekend. And so I basically spent the entire weekend answering questions in real time with founders, which was crazy fun. And so all of that is to say that I'm kind of like just generically questioned out for the moment, but I'll be back next week with better questions. And so I actually decided to take one of the more interesting questions that I got during the weekend and just kind of take a moment to talk about that here. And the question that I got, which was, it's not going to seem like a very startup-y question at first. And it's actually one of the more important questions that you're going to ask yourself fairly routinely as you go through the startup journey. And this question was, I'm stuck, what do I do? And so I know it doesn't seem like a very useful, very helpful question, but it's actually one of those things that's going to happen a lot. We have in design thinking this concept called the groan zone, the groan zone, right? And the basic idea is that when you're doing design thinking or doing anything in innovation, anything that requires ideation at all, you have divergent thinking followed by convergent thinking. Or to do that a little bit better here, you have divergent thinking followed by convergent thinking, or what we can think of as creating choices and then making choices, roughly how it works. So before we just dive down the path of we're going to do X, Y, and Z, we say, okay, let's create a bunch of choices, create a bunch of options for ourselves. Let's do quantity over quality. And then we filter down and find the one right thing to approach on, right? It makes sense. Ideation, innovation, etc. But the transition between creating choices and making choices is actually a hard and pretty blurry line. And how do you do that? How do you know when you've created enough choices that it's now time to make the choice? How do you make that transition? And it's actually really, really hard. And we call that the groan zone, because you reach this point where you feel like there's all these choices, there's so many options, none of them feel right. What's the path forward? And the groan zone. And it's a really common part of the design thinking process. And when you're doing a startup, when you're doing something innovative, you're inherently in that process. And so lots of times in the cycles, you're going to encounter this groan zone. But I am not going to answer this question today in sort of a metaphysical way. I'm not going to answer this in a coping mechanism way. That's an interesting question in and of itself. But this was 48 hours. Find as much traction as possible. So we're not about to spend a bunch of time in the metaphysics of this. We have micro lessons, like real lessons along the way of how we can cope with that. And we learn a lot about ourselves through the process. But this is about, let's make forward progress right now. So going back to this particular team, and they were doing a great job. Of course, they didn't know it. They were in the grown zone, but they were doing a great job. And they had an idea that it wasn't really bearing out with customers. They had this concept. It was brand new as of 12, 15 hours before then. So it's super new. And they had formed a thesis, and they'd gone out and talked to customers, and they found some customers were kind of interested, but then the logistics wouldn't work. And when they tried to make the logistics work, it broke the customer validation. And so there was this thing of like, what do we do? Is it pivot? Is it persevere? And so many choices and so many options, and kind of stuck, right? And so I think what's really interesting is that that when you're in that moment, it can be very difficult to focus. You have this big mess on the table, and it's like, okay, what do we do with this thing? And so I said, design thinking 101. So I'm like, let's take a step back and let's talk about the customer. And all I did was ask questions. So I did not do any of the work. The team did all of the work, and they did really good work. So I'm not the genius who solved this. That's not how this world works. The founders did all the things. But I'll tell you the questions that I asked. So I started with this idea of how do you know what problem you're solving? You know what problem you're solving because you're solving a problem for a person that you can identify. So let's start there, right? Design thinking 101, start with empathy, then you move into defining the problem, and then you ideate on solutions, and then you prototype a solution, and then you put it in front of customers, you get real feedback, and then you start the cycle basically over again. It's that process. But it starts with the empathy, which means it starts with understanding your customer. So we said, who are you serving? And so they kind of like went back and forth a little bit on this because, again, grown zone, lots of options. And eventually they're like, okay, we think we're kind of looking at this particular person, this woman who's in her mid 30s, and she's a mom, and she has this problem related to car maintenance. And so I said, okay, so let's focus on this. And so then we started to talk about her. And I just said, okay, one of you take to the whiteboard, because we of course have whiteboards and sticky notes everywhere. It's startups, right? And so I said, okay, so start, taking the whiteboard, and tell me about her. And so they knew a few things, like what I just told you, basically her age, and that she had kids, and that she had a car. And so then I started asking probing questions about what else they could deduce based on how much they knew about her. And this was, that because it was about car maintenance, that she wasn't driving a new car. Obviously, she wasn't driving a new car because she wouldn't need a car maintenance, an app to help you find car maintenance, reliable car maintenance for low stakes maintenance. If you have a newer car, that's less likely to be true, but you're not going to have a really old beater either. It's going to be a car that's a little bit past its warranty. She also doesn't have an extended warranty. And so what do those two things tell us about her? Well, it tells us she's probably not loaded. She's probably not super affluent because she's not driving a brand new car. Also, the kids kind of contribute to that as well. So then we just kept stacking these things on top of each other until we started to get a fairly robust picture of what we think, at least, I'll come back to that in a second, of what we think this person's actually like. And so we got all this information, started narrowing it down and dropping it down onto the page, onto the whiteboard. And then eventually I just asked, like, okay, so let's give this person a name. We're going to keep talking about her a lot. All the work we do is going to build on this work. So let's give her a name. And they came up with the name Emma. And so we gave this mom who is in need of kind of low stakes mechanical services, the name Emma. Okay, and so then it's like, okay, now we have Emmy here. Now we can focus on what is the most important problem to Emma. And they quickly discarded the idea that they had from 12 to 15 hours before, because it didn't fit with the persona anymore. It didn't really work. But a lot of the other things that surfaced in some of the conversations they had started to bubble up. And that's where the idea of this low stakes maintenance came to play. Her check engine light comes on, something like that, that's going to require some pretty immediate attention. So they started focusing in on that, and then sort of ran away with the process, and then came back with something pretty solid. And they went out and talked to a bunch of Emmas, and then came back, and some of the things were wrong, but most of it was right. And then they were able to take that as a direction that they could go in, and that gave them clarity on the problem, on the vision, on the customer, on where to find them, on what was important to them, on the budget, which meant to the business model. It gave extraordinary clarity and hypotheses just by saying, this is the customer we think we're serving. And that's why I called this little rant here, my little story time rant, the importance of personas, because What's interesting is that because we're starting with the concept of empathy, which is for a person with a problem, because we're starting with that concept of empathy, we have to contextualize it in a person. And when we're able to do that, when we're able to create a semi fictional representation of that person, we're able to put Emma up on the whiteboard and give her personality, give her psychographics and demographics, and give her motivations and wants and needs and fears and jobs to be done. We're able to put all of what we want to do in the context of her life. It tells us an extraordinary amount about our ability to serve her. It tells us about what's important to her. It tells us what messages will resonate with her. It tells us where we can find her. So we say, we got to go find a bunch of these Emmas out there. How do we find them? Where do we find them? Where are these people? How do we find these moms? Then it tells you that too, because you start to be able to understand this as a only semi-fictional representation of a real person. It's still a real person kind of at the end of the day. So I say all that to say that there's nothing more important than forming a baseline understanding of your customer from the outset. And the best way to do that, I found, is by creating customer personas, to put that down on paper. And you're wrong about a chunk of it, and that's okay. You start with your gut. Maybe you can ask ChatGPT a few questions, get some information. It's wrong, but it's hopefully directionally right. If there's a there, it's directionally right. And now we can take this information, say, here's where we can find Emma. We can go talk to Emma, and we can start to revise that persona as we go. And now when we go to do anything, when we go to put an ad somewhere, when we go to figure out what our value prop messaging is, when we go to say what goes on our landing page, when we start to do feature prioritization, we start talking about our product roadmap, all of that stuff goes back to, is this something Emma wants? Is this something Emma needs? Is this something that's going to help Emma? And if the answer is no, then you have your answer. And if the answer is yes, it's great. And it's based on real data. It's based on a semi-fictional representation of a real person. So enough of that rant there. I've been ranting for like 10 minutes on customer personas. So if that's something that's actually interesting you, I'm actually going to be dropping a new video right here on my YouTube channel about customer personas. It'll drop tomorrow at the time I'm recording this, which would be Friday, April 7th. So it's probably already there by the time you're watching this, in which case I will actually just throw the card up here so you can go to it. But yeah, check out that video. I also have a template that you can use to fill out that has all the questions that you need to do. We'll talk about some of the applications, and it'll be a bit more robust and in depth. So check that out, customer personas. I'll also put the link in the description when that goes live tomorrow. So fantastic, cool. Well, let's kind of move on here. Got a couple more things, but we actually have a question from the chat here. So let's throw that up. So hey, Dan, good morning. I also see June says good morning here. Good morning, June. Thanks for taking my question. Your experience being part of multiple successful startups. In your opinion, what percentage of debt would you recommend using a starting business? There's not a clean answer to this question, and I'll say in advance two things: one, not a lawyer; two, not a financial advisor, not an accountant or anybody like that. So with those things kind of out of the way, what percentage of debt would I recommend in starting a new business? So I actually like to think of this in terms of bets. I think bets are a very reasonable way to talk about this. So if you think about like, let's say you're playing a game of poker or something like that. Hopefully that metaphor resonates with you. But let's say you're playing a game of poker. And you start off, let's just say it's Texas Hold'em, and you look at your cards, and you're like, okay, like this is interesting, and you look at your position relative to other players, and you're like, yeah, it's worth playing a little bet here, right? And so you throw a little money in the pot, and then you get some players are folding, and others are making their own bets, and you have the blinds, which maybe they might just be able to call, or maybe they raise, but you're getting all that's data, right? So you're getting further information in, and so then okay, great, so now that's good. And then you get the flop. And now you have the 3 communal cards, and that tells you even more about what the strength of your hand. And hopefully also, if you're a good poker player, it will tell you the strength of your hand relative to at least what the other players are signaling their hand is too. And so then it comes time to, all right, now you got to make a bet. And so this is where you say, okay, I'm going to proportion my bet to the evidence, assuming you're not bluffing, and bluffing does not work with startups. It doesn't work in the business world. But so you have to proportion your bet to the evidence. It's like, do I have sufficient evidence to warrant that this makes a lot of sense? So that's how I would think about it. And so when you say what kind of debt would you recommend using when starting a business, depending on how you're defining starting a business, I would say none. I would start with no debt. I would try to find a way to find out if I'm on the right track without spending any money, without spending any resources, other than maybe a small amount of time. And there are lots of ways to do that depending on the kind of business. This is where you can just go out and start talking to the customer. This is what Wrenchworks, which was the company that I was talking about before, that's what basically what they did is they just went out and said, let's just talk to people that we think want mobile gasoline refill. And so that like the gas tank comes to you instead of you having to go to a gas station. Of course, logistically, it's very difficult to do. But anyway, they started going out and talking to those people and then validating, are we on the right track? And this was, basically in just a matter of hours. It cost them hours. That's a pretty freaking small bet. So they went out and spent that. And then once you start getting data back, then you can say, all right, now I have evidence. Now does this additional evidence warrant a larger bet? Do I need to pivot? Do I need to change track? Do I need to change tactics? Whatever. Or am I okay to just make a bigger bet? So I think about it that way. And if you're the kind of financing that you use for your business is going to depend on the kind of business that it is. So if you're doing a main street business, maybe a storefront, like a typical one or a franchise or something like that, then you're basically going to be debt financing it, right? You might be able to do that through an SBA loan or something like that, which if you do is going to have like collateral attached to it because you don't have revenue for the existing business. So you're basically going to be like tying it to your either the money that you have or to your, home equity or something like that. In which case it's like, okay, like, is that does that make sense? Do I have enough evidence from the marketplace, not from in here, but from the marketplace where it says, like, I think that that's an interesting bet. I think that that makes a lot of sense to make right now. And then it becomes, what is the size of the bet that you want to make? On the other hand, if you are doing a scalable startup, you'll start in a much more, maybe a scrappy way where you try to put some prototypes in front of customers, get some data, maybe even get some pre-sales or letters of intent or something like that to get evidence. And then you can take that evidence to an investor of some kind, either like an early friends and family or an angel investor, pre-seed investors, to get money in exchange for equity. So it's not debt really, it's an equity investment in your company. So they'll own a percentage of your company in exchange for the money they injected in. And so that's all fairly standard, and there's terms and deal structures and everything that are fairly boilerplate for a lot of those early stage investments, at least with a little bit of wiggle room. So there's different paths that you can take, but either way, it comes back to like, don't spend more time or more energy than you have evidence for. So proportion, like I like to talk about David Hume, the philosopher. He said a wise man proportions his belief to the evidence, right? And he meant that the degree to which we believe something to be true should be proportional to the amount of evidence we have as to the truthfulness of that claim. So the basic, like science, if you can think about it that way, we don't accept a claim unless we have evidence, and the more evidence we have, the more we believe it. But I like to say a little modification of that the wise founder proportions her effort to the evidence. So only put in as much effort as you have evidence, and that applies to time or money or basically any other resource. So. So June's been kind of commenting on this in chat too. You're making a pie crust. That's very June of you. I love it. And then also, startup starts with a small amount of time and then takes over your life. That is very, very accurate. But that progression that you're calling out, starting with a small amount of time and then taking over your life, is really wise. Because you don't want to make a bigger bet than is really warranted at the time. And so you start out with something small and you do it. A lot of people think that like, that the idea here is for, I'm going to go quit my job and start this business and it's going to be amazing. And that's almost never what you want to do. Almost always, you started out as a nights and weekends side hustle thing, a little bit of time, get a little bit of validation, get some effort, get some data back. And then you go to, making a bigger bet, a bigger bet, a bigger bet. And then eventually it becomes smart and prudent, even not to mention a good bet, or maybe even necessary to then quit your job and like do the thing. So you're very welcome, Dan. Thanks for asking the question. It's a good question. So the last thing that I'm going to talk about today, because we're almost out of time here today, is I have a new little podcast and video series called Startup Meditations, and it's actually every single day I put out a little snippet. It's a video on TikTok, it's a podcast on all the podcasting platforms, and then it's a little video right here on YouTube. But they all last less than 5 minutes. I think the longest one so far has been 3.5 minutes or something like that. They're all pretty short, really easily digestible, and it's one startup thing to think about for your startup journey. And so I was actually just going to play a quick one here on pitching from a few days ago that you can check out. Or actually, you know what? This isn't. This is today's, I think. So this is the one that went out today. But anyway, this one's on pitching, just to give you a little taste for it. So I'm going to go ahead and play the video. It's 2 minutes long, but I won't play the whole thing. And yeah, let's take it away, JDM, I guess. Welcome back to Startup Meditations, where I provide a daily snippet of startup wisdom for you to ponder. Number 6, your pitch shouldn't be very original. Despite what a lot of founders seem to believe, a startup pitch is not supposed to be unique or creative. It's supposed to convey information. This comes from the misunderstanding of exactly what a startup pitch is. A startup pitch is a story, and every story has structure, and structure creates predictability. That predictability is what allows those who listen to pitches for investors or coaches or co-founders or even customers at the end of the day to hear and process information in a way that they're used to. You got to remember that an investor hears lots and lots of pitches. Personally, I'm narrowing in on 2,000 of them. When you hear something so many times that has so much structure and so much predictability to it, it creates a pattern of listening as well, that we use the format of the pitch in order to fill in some of the details that maybe we don't hear you say right off the bat. In other words, the pattern does the heavy lifting for you. The problem is, if you deviate from that pattern, we actually have to do more processing, more context shifting to try to understand what it is that you're trying to convey. At the end of the day, you're actually increasing our cognitive burden by trying to be creative. Ironically, that means we remember less of what you're trying to say. We understand less of what you're trying to say. We absorb less than what you're trying to say. So stick with the standard structure. Do the 10, 20, 30, 10 slides, 20 minutes, 30-point font. Follow the standard story structure of this is the problem that we're trying to solve, and this is the people that it affects, and they're trying to do this and it doesn't work, so we're going to offer this amazing solution and value proposition. But it's not just this customer, there's an amazingly large pool of customers out there who have this particular problem, and the competition just isn't getting it done because, and that creates this opportunity for us. And you know that we can do it because we've got this attraction already and this amazing team, and all we need is this little thing from you, and we're going to go big places. Standard structure. So here's today's question. What is the most straightforward way that you can convey your startup in just 3 sentences? Let me know. So yeah, so that's basically how they work. They're all kind of the same way, that there's some concept. I talk about it for a little bit and then end with a question to create focus. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, it's all about the metacognition of what makes an entrepreneur successful. So if that kind of thing interests you, check out Startup Meditations. If you're right here on YouTube, you can just subscribe to the channel, and I drop those there. Otherwise, they're on TikTok and whatever platform you choose to explore for that. So yeah, if that's interesting to you, check that out. All right, back to things. I think we've got some things in the chat here. So back to June. So true about the startup pitch having a format. It works. I did it at least the other pitch. Yeah. So it's amazing how true it is. Like people, it's just so much. They just like to think that I need to be original. I need to do something different. I need to invent this thing from whole cloth, and that makes pitches really hard. Pitches are not hard. They're just not hard. They're not super easy, but they are not that hard. And that's because they do follow structure, they do follow format. Most of the time when people are finding pitching really hard, the actual pitch itself, it's actually because they haven't done the work necessary to fill in all the boxes. Like people say like, oh, I'm having such a hard time filling out my business model slide. I'm like, well, you're having trouble filling out your business model slide because you don't have a validated business model yet. So you're not ready to pitch about that. Like that's why the story is the easy part. So it's too true, June. Like it's actually fairly straightforward. So So there's that. I think we'll probably call it here. It's about 25 minutes, or is my target for these office hours, and I promise to get back to your actual questions next week. You are too kind, Nick. Thank you so much. It means a lot. And thank you to all of you who joined live, and I'll for those of you watching asynchronously, you are awesome as well. And with that, I hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your Thursday, an epic weekend, and I'll see you guys all next week here. Peace out. See you guys later.